Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited and happy to be here. Thank you for the presentations so far. They have been very inspiring. Among other things, I am currently shopping for new ideas about what to do in the future, since this project that I will shortly present today in front of you is ending very soon, within a month. So this paper will present some of the main results of a 4-year ethnomusicological and musicological research project on the first decades of the domestic record industry in Croatia and former Yugoslavia, which was funded by the Croatian Science Foundation. The project, titled The Record Industry in Croatia from 1927 until the end of the 1950s, started in February 2020 and represented the first attempt of a systemic scholarly approach to the early record production and beginnings of the domestic record industry in Croatia and Yugoslavia. It focuses on the 78 RPM shellac records, which were produced in Zagreb at the time by 3 successive record companies, Edison Belpenkala, Elektroton, and Jugoton. I will speak about, offer short historiographic data on each of these companies later. Our project's primary aim was to document and reconstruct the music repertoires, authors, performers, and producers involved in the creation of the Yugoslav 78 RPM records. Secondly, we also strived to investigate the processes of selection and representation involved in the record production, and to contextualize this industry and its implications for the music and social life of the time. The 7 of collaborators on the project were either historical musicologists or ethnomusicologists. So, as you can imagine, we were primarily interested in the music of different genres and categories, some in production of classical music, some in formation of standardized folk music genres, and some, like me, in the popular music, for which the record industry provides one of the most important resources. We all entered this research area by accident, so to speak, invited by our project leader, Najela Ceribasic, who actually attempted to do research on early recordings of Sevdalinka songs, so as those that you could hear yesterday in Damir's interpretation. And in this research, she hit a wall, realizing that she had no access nor knowledge of the primary material. So none of the institutions in Croatia or former Yugoslavia systematically gathered shellac period records. We had no access or information of how to access them. They were scattered around different institutions, museums, archives. So first thing we needed to do is to locate and map where are all those institutions and sometimes private collectors who might have some of the materials we needed. We have, of course, already presented on these topics on several conferences and organized an international conference in Zagreb in March 2023. Some of you attended it. And we are also currently preparing publication of a book containing more than 30 case studies on various music styles and genre and other topics related to early Yugoslav discography. As one of its most important results, our project includes a comprehensive database, as most of the projects you were hearing about, of records produced in Zagreb between the late 20s and the end of the 50s, which currently contains more than 9,000 entries. Its structure resembles probably most to the previously illustrated GHT database, which means that it's primarily for academics, unfortunately. Every entry contains information about the record, so this is the first level, as well as individual recordings on that record. Alongside Alongside the photo of the record label and the details from that label, database entries also hold information reconstructed from catalogs and secondary sources, as well as the data on the holder of the record itself, be it an institution or a private collector. Also, although our project did not aim at digitization of the sound, we provide a small number of the digitized recordings and links, as well as the links to the existing digitized versions of records, so links to YouTube canals and such of the recordings digitized primarily by collectors and enthusiasts. Aside from that, our project's website contains digitized sales catalogs of the first Yugoslav record factories. The simplest way to access this database is to simply type Croatian e-discography in your search engine, and the so far published information should be easily reachable. Now for the short histories of each company. The first and the oldest Zagreb record factory was Edison Bell Penkala. It was established in 1926 when the Zagreb pencil factory Penkala signed an agreement with the Edison Bell company from London. EBP first began supplying the domestic market with records from its parent company, but soon started to produce its own records with local artists connected to national theaters and to the social and cultural life of Zagreb, Belgrade, and Ljubljana. Looking at its entire production of about 2,200 records, half consisted of local repertoires and the other half of foreign licensed repertoire. Even though recordings of local music or local artists on records by foreign record producers started from the beginning of the 20th century, after the war, the local production brought additional focus on local artists. Additionally, after the First World War, Zagreb developed into an important cultural, industrial, and financial center of the then Kingdom of Yugoslavia, increasing the customer's purchasing power and the lack of copyright laws at the time, as well as customs and taxes on record production, low customs and taxes, non-existing customs and taxes on record production at the time, were seen as desirable advantages for the perspective of record companies. The establishment of Edison Bell's branch in Yugoslavia in 1926 also coincided with the appearance of the company's own patent for electrical recording, and EBP was envisioned as a platform for expansion not only into the Yugoslav market, but also Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, and even countries of the Arabic and Hebrew languages. Thanks to Edison Bell's engineer Paul Voigt, EBP is also noted for being one of the first companies to engage in remote recording of a gramophone record. After the establishment of Edison Bell International, the Zagreb company came under its ownership. By 1930, EBP slowed down its production due to unprofitability. But even when Edison Bell International declared bankruptcy in June 1933, the Zagreb branch continued pressing and selling records and occasionally recording until 1937. It was legally dissolved only in 1945. So historically speaking, EBP holds a significant place recording numerous well-known musicians in Yugoslavia and documenting some of the most popular repertoires. Its operation not only contributed to the standardization of recorded repertoire and the development of its audience, but also facilitated the work of later companies, Electroton and Jugoton, both of which utilized some of its equipment and even the selected recordings. So the second company, Electroton, was established in Ljubljana in 1933 by Zora and Dragutin Križanec, two private entrepreneurs. In September 1937, shortly after EBP's bankruptcy, the couple decided to expand to Zagreb after an initially unsuccessful attempt. During the Second World War, in the era of Nazi collaborative state of the so-called independent state of Croatia, the company was the only active record factory and the main supplier and producer of records. Due to the cooperation with the state authorities, Electroton was able to import records primarily from the Axis state, such as Italy's, Germany's, or Czech Republic's records. In 1943, the company acquired recording equipment from the Italian company Fonit and additionally rented the Edison Belpencala's press, which enabled production of its own records. Those primarily related to recordings of popular songs by Radio Zagreb singers, but also military records for the state propaganda purposes. After the end of the war, in May 1945, Electroton was confiscated and nationalized, and the Križane spouses went through a trial as the collaborators with the fascists. And Electroton was liquidated in July 1947. In that same year, the record company Jugoton was founded. Aside from acquiring and nationalizing assets of Electroton and EBP, for the first 2 years of business, Jugoton outsourced the services of Czechoslovak Gramofonove Zavody, which produced its recordings and matrices. In 1948, because of the Tito-Stalin split and Yugoslav turning away from the USSR, devices for recording and making matrices were acquired from abroad, marking the beginning of its own production. In 1954, Jugoton also started the production of vinyl records, but continued shellac production until the end of the 50s, which is why we took 1959 as the end of our project period. It also marks the end of the shellac 78 RPM records. The repertoire recorded on shellac records consisted mainly of folk and popular music, and in the early years, mass partisan songs, as well as a smaller number of classical compositions. The engaged musicians were mostly connected to the state radio stations, primarily Radio Zagreb, Belgrade, Ljubljana, Sarajevo, and Skopje, but also Radio Osijek and Novi Sad. Jugoton was privatized after the breakup of Yugoslavia, and its legacy fell into the hands of a new company, which was called Croatia Records. So, as previously mentioned, we also contextualized the activities of these companies within 3 very different socio-political and economic systems, and on the other hand, within the international network and regulation of the record companies. We also linked the record production and reception with what we call the other levers of musical and wider cultural life, such as radio, theater, concert and festival programs, film, music publishing, and dance culture. What we discovered is that the record industry illuminated modernization processes in Croatian and Yugoslav societies, and that its policies and practices, apart from being constitutive for music and musical life, also wrote the microhistory of Croatian and Yugoslav society. And finally, we used the early Yugoslav discography as an insight into the formation of the most important music genres and styles, and found out that the discographic research gives deeper and better understanding to the aesthetic and socio-political crystallization of locally important music styles. Also, examination of forgotten and lesser-known records helps in drawing out slightly different histories, foregrounding genres and styles which have been downplayed in regional music historiographies, which I will shortly demonstrate on the example of popular music production. So, while in some other parts of the world, the popular music historiography develops from the 19th century onwards. For Croatia and former Yugoslavia, the interwar period can be considered as the beginning of a clearer understanding of the formation of popular music due to several facts. The beginning of public radio broadcasts, which began in 1926, the beginnings of the record industry, which began in 1927, as I said, and introduction of copyright law in 1929, which represented the cornerstone for music industry. The regional popular music studies in the countries of former Yugoslavia have been developing slowly, primarily by historians or journalists. So one of my aims was trying to provide a fresh perspective through discography and some musicological knowledge. One of the established ways of defining popular music is associating popularity with means of dissemination, and especially with the development of role of mass media. Following this view, all music produced within record industry could be considered popular. However, the development of the music industry simultaneously worked to establish clearer differences between individual categories and genres of music. Music that could be recognized as popular, that belonged neither to classical or folk music, was scattered among different categories in genre in Edison Bell Pencala's sales catalogs. Among them are dance music, foreign music, cabaret, latest hits, songs from sound films, and other. In this context, the popular music repertoire consisted of foreign dances and songs in the original language, foreign songs in translation, and newly created songs of the Schlager type. Popular songs and dances were performed on domestic records by various foreign and domestic ensembles. The domestic audience knew how to hear and recognize modern Western elements in hits and dance tunes, but their release on the domestic market was nevertheless adapted and domesticized primarily through song translations. The domestic renditions of foreign songs in Serbo-Croatian language also included various interventions in the instrumental arrangement and performance, which was one of my primary tasks within the project, to try to detect the original or older recordings, or sometimes even authors of foreign songs, which were all translated into Croatian or Serbian languages and rearranged. And what was interesting about that is that I realized through this common occurrence of translations of popular song, I realized that popular songs before 1950s or even 1960s were not conceived of as one performance or one recording. They were approached more like folk music. So if you have one performance, you only think of it as a suggestion, and then domestic producers and interpreters make their own version in their language and in their arrangements. So completely different way of thinking about popular music than developed later after the 60s. The production of records in the post-war Yugoton factory began only a year before the historic Tito-Stalin conflict in '48, which turned out to be particularly significant for popular music. So as a socialist country that did not take side in the Cold War division, Yugoslavia represented a mediator of Western trends for the countries of the Eastern Bloc, as one of the countries where Eastern European tourists could travel safely and where they could buy otherwise unavailable Western items such as gramophone records. In the first few years of Yugoton's work, its production relied, as I said, mostly on folk music, partisan songs. And popular music production began in '49 and became the most important category in the following decade. Recorded songs and dances were most often accompanied by dance ensembles and jazz orchestra associated with national radio stations. The number of the domestic popular songs increased significantly during the 1950s, but the foreign repertoire still makes up the majority. For example, out of the selected records of popular music, less than a third contain original compositions by Yugoslav authors, while the other is still foreign repertoire, although mostly as covers, so again in Serbo-Croatian and in domestically produced arrangements. Most of the previous popular music researchers emphasized the importance of the festival infrastructure, which mostly developed during the 60s as a key institutional framework for popular music. Also, other researchers relied mostly on written historiographical sources such as cultural and political documents and media articles. What the work on the project contributed to elucidating the history of popular music in Yugoslavia is on the one hand, more systematic insight into the material structure that helps correct previous unknowns, and especially taking the sound of records as a source of analysis. For example, Radina Vučetić, a historian, writing about popular music in early socialism, states that jazz production on records before 1963 was extremely modest, and that there were only 50 records of jazz music. So although there were few foreign bands with a jazz repertoire, in the 50s some domestic ensembles specialized in styles of swing jazz, and many arrangements by radio orchestras from Belgrade and Zagreb were also made in some of the jazz styles, which increases the number of those records. So if it doesn't state jazz on the record label, then you have to listen to the record and then conclude which style it is arranged in. Similarly, the cover of the song Shake, Rattle and Roll, performed by Ivo Robić on Jugoton's record from 1956, is often apostrophized as the first domestic rock and roll record, although by listening to the recording it is possible to recognize that it is in fact in a swing jazz arrangement, so opposite from what I previously said. This shows like it was more old-fashioned arrangement. Moreover, unlike many previous reviews of the popular music of Yugoslavia, in which jazz and rock stand out as the only styles worthy of attention, our research presents a different and more colorful picture of popular music. And in fact, the majority of popular music production is located outside of these two styles and can be characterized as a kind of easy listening music, which does not make it less important, nor less musically interesting, as shown by our analysis of arrangements. So the contributions of the project, along with correcting and supplementing known data, shed new light on the unknown and neglected aspects of popular music of the research period, and they do so by also taking sound as a research source. Thank you very much.